All right. So we got a lot we wanted to get through. So we'll try to get moving on this first. So just a quick overview. How many people are working with AppV? Or is there anybody here not working with AppV today? Oh, we got a few. OK, so good. Glad I left this slide in. This is the basics about what AppV is about. It's all about isolating the application and the data associated with that application, which is user-specific. Okay, I refer to that as application-related data. And in AppV, primarily what we're doing is we're trying to isolate these applications, allow them to live as individual components separate from the operating system so that they can work without interfering with other applications on the same box. There's also a delivery mechanism, all right, although we have lots of delivery mechanisms today, so that may not be the primary choice. It's usually that isolation that we're trying to do. But we can also improve application behavior. Applications that weren't written for multi-user scenarios, we can take these applications and deploy them on a RDS server using AppV and make that application act as a multi-user application. Also for application service providers or cloud hosting providers, they call themselves today, they have an additional issue called multi-tenancy, where they not only have multiple users on the same machine, they have multiple customers on the same machine. And need the application tuned differently from one customer to another so that it talks to a different back-end database, for example, so that allows them to share that infrastructure more cost-effectively for their customers. One of the other things that we can do is also serve up multiple versions of the same application on the same machine. And that's very popular in an RDS environment as well. One way that we describe this is we talk about bubbles. Right? We have our operating system, and we want to add these applications in. We want them to be able to act independently and not change the operating system when we bring those applications in. But we want applications to be able to work together when they need to. And that's what AppV does very well for us. And we get to that application data. As a user runs the application, they make changes. And if the application wants to write those changes into HKey local machine rather than the HKey current user, or into a configuration file somewhere, often that's not done with a multi-user environment in mind. And AppV will take that data, and as the user makes those changes, it'll get separated off into a bubble for that particular user for that application. And it can follow them from machine to machine as it needs to. Okay. So AppV comes back from the old Softricity company, where I got started with the product. I helped develop the product back in 2000. And it's been a long time. AppV 5 is the first major rewrite of this technology since we originally built the product back in 2000. The platform we built on in those days was Windows NT. That was the predominantly installed desktop in corporations at that point. Windows 2000 was the newcomer, so we were covering the basis of those two. A lot of the design decisions we made early on were based on the technology that we had. For example, one of the problems a lot of companies have had in initially implementing AppV is that they have to have this virtualized drive letter available at the clients. And it's the best practice to make that drive letter be the same on every single client system. That's what we usually refer to as a Q drive, because that was the default letter. But the company had to try to find a drive letter available. Well, the reason we did that was because in Windows NT, the only way to expose a file system was to mount it as a drive letter. We have capabilities well beyond that now. We have the ability to mount things at a folder level. And part of the refresh was to rewrite the platform and really modernize it and prepare it for the next 10 years. So this is a summary of the things that changed in the product, which is pretty much everything. They spent 3 years rewriting this product. They pretty much, as far as I could tell, started with a clean piece of paper and said, how would we build application virtualization today? And once they figured out how they wanted it to work, they then went back to the code and figured out, okay, what could we bring along and what do we rewrite? And they rewrote an awful lot of the system. We have a new file system. The servers are completely rewritten. The sequencer looks the same from a UI perspective. If you've used 4.6 SP1 or SP2, it's very much the same with a few small changes. But underneath, it's completely rewritten because the output is completely different now. The client is obviously rewritten. It has a new management console written in Silverlight. We have a lot more transparency. meant to talk about scripts, right? And connection groups as part of this as well. So we'll get into that stuff later. But the primary tenet for the development of App v5 was to change the way the isolation works. The feedback they've gotten from a lot of customers was that what we were doing was probably over-isolating the applications. And one of their tenets was to make the applications, when they're virtualized, behave more like native installed applications. Now that does bring in some difficulties for customers who are used to using 4.6, in that some of the application behavior now changes as you go to 5.0. And things that AppV solved for you automatically in the past, you now need to concern yourself a little bit with. So it's not necessarily an easy decision to move to 5.0, but I think in the long run, it's one you'll end up wanting to make. Okay, so the file system. So we wrote our own file system. We called it the Jigsaw file system when we built the product originally, because we needed capabilities that didn't exist in any existing file system out there. Primarily, it's all around that streaming portion. If you look at any other commercial file system out there, if you try to run an executable that's living on another machine, the entire executable has to come over into memory before it can start up. We wanted something that could bring over portions of it, start up, and then bring the other pieces over on demand, the same way that Windows pages to the disk locally. So we developed our file system, and that was that SFT file format you saw, as well as the drivers that got installed with the 4.6 client. And they've basically replaced that now. What we have is something which is much more like a zip file format. In fact, you can take the output of the sequencer now, which is called the .appv file, and you can rename that. Let me say this correctly. You make a copy of the file, you rename the copy to the .zip extension, and you can open it up with any zip tool and look at it. What you don't ever want to do is save that zip file and try to use it again as an appv file, because you will break the package. It's actually an extension to the zip format. Not only do you have the basic zip format for putting stuff down, but we also still have that streaming information, because we still do have a streaming file system. And so when you save that zip file using any of the standard zip tools, you will break your package. Okay. We got rid of RTSP. Everything now is using standard protocols, HTTP and HTTPS, UNC paths to get access to the packages themselves. So it's much more straightforward to implement in your environment. And it's really the way that I've been pushing customers to use 4.6 for a while now, is to just ignore the RTSP and work around that. When we talk about streaming, in AppV 4.6, we had two different ways you could configure the package for streaming. One way was that at the end of the sequencing, you'd launch the package and you'd get what we call a small feature block 1. And the package consisted of either feature block 1 and feature block 2. And basically, everything in feature block 1 needed to be present at the client for the application to launch, and the rest could stream over. So if while you were sequencing, you launched the application, you'd get a scenario that's similar to what we have at AppV5 in the middle bar here, where you get a small amount that has to come over initially, just the portions of the EXEs and the DLLs that got read off a disk when you prepared the application. That would have to come over, launch, and then everything else would come over on demand. As an alternative in 4.6, you could decide not to launch the application, and we get something that's similar to the bottom bar here, where everything got put in feature block 1. In AppV5, we actually have 3 blocks. They're called the primary, the publishing, and the streaming blocks. The primary and publishing together act like the old feature block 1. But we have 3 options when we prepare the application now. We have the old original 2 options, plus we have a 3rd option, which says, not only am I not launching anything, I want that initial publishing block to be as small as possible. So the primary block includes basically the metadata. What are the files and the DLLs in this package? Where do they live? Give me the virtual registry. And then the publishing block includes the pieces needed for publishing, like the actual icons and things like that. So you can get that block very, very small. I really love using that top mode in the scenario with what you'll be talking about, the shared cache mode. Those two together work really well. It makes for the fastest publishing when you're doing publishing on demand for a user. All right. The client. Okay, so the Q drive is gone. The console is now written in Silverlight. We talked a little bit, and we'll get into that more, about the shared cache mode. Any AppV client that's sitting in the data center, so this would be an RDS server, you know, a XenApp server, or VDI scenarios, I think you really should be looking at the shared cache mode. We had a read-only cache mode for AppV 4.6, and that was a bit of a pain in the butt because it was a maintenance chore. The new version actually looks to the individual packages sitting on your file share. And so when you want to update or add a new package, you're just adding a new folder up there and then publishing out, oh, there's a new version of this app. So the maintenance is much easier with this mode. We also have PowerShell. If you don't know PowerShell yet, you're going to have to learn a little bit of PowerShell. And I'll just give my own plug here, just to mention. We have a PowerShell API book, which is nothing more than a reference guide. The online documentation for the AppV PowerShell isn't the greatest in the world. So my daughter and I spent last summer writing that book to get it all accurate for you. Okay. And the last thing up there is that we have this coexistence with 4.6 SP2. So because we have a new file format, it's incompatible with the old SFP format. Matt will talk about a converter a little bit later on to help you along with the transition. But we do have the capability of having two clients on a machine at the same time. So you can have your 4.6.2 client, and then you can have a 5.0 client on the same machine at the same time, delivering up packages from each of them. So you don't have to go with a flash cutover. Now I will suggest that it's not a good idea to think about this as a great migration strategy. This should be used sparingly. I think if you have all of your packages today in 4.6, and you start doing 1 or 2 in AppV5, putting them on the same machine, okay. At some point, you're going to want to convert stuff over. I wouldn't start moving everything over in production to 5.0 on a piecemeal basis. You want to have everything in 4.6 and 1 or 2 in 5, or 1 or 2 left over in 4.6 and everything on 5. If you get into like a 50-50 mix, you're just asking for trouble. Okay, I don't know of any particular problems, but you're just looking for trouble if you do that. All right, so let's hit our first demo here. Just to show you a little bit, the AppV console, as I said, it was rewritten in, this is the client console. So this is written in Silverlight. Microsoft intends this to be available to all of the users, unlike the old MMC console. The user can't do a whole lot with it. Basically, they can do an update, which is if you're working with the AppV server, go do a refresh, is what we used to call that. When you do that, it does the what I call the Atom shake. You know, do you have the Brooklyn shake out here? You guys know what that is? Yeah. Okay, well, this is the Atom shake. Atom is the developer at AppV that we work with all the time. So I call it the Atom shake. And that thing just dances back and forth. I don't have it set up here. I can't show you that. But the user can also see what applications they can get. They can see what state they're in. They can do what's called a mount, which is basically load the package if they want with a oh, I'm not getting a click. I love demos. They can also repair their package, which is basically saying, take me back to a pristine state. I did something in this application and I broke it. And they broke it by writing stuff into their application-related data area. And so they can repair their package by just saying, oh, I want to repair this. It'll just remove that, and it'll look like the package is fresh to them again. You cannot today remove this capability from the user, any of the things that I just showed you there, except by removing the console from the machine. So if this is functionality you don't want to give those users, you got to get rid of the console. And I have one more thing I was supposed to show here, right? Nope, that's it. Matt.
So even if the user don't have access to the console, if they still have access to PowerShell, they probably will be able to do that, to do those actions anyway. There's no way of taking that over. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about some of the customizations that we can do nowadays with AppV5. How many of you are using like OSD files to add some additional information into your application packages? Not many, not too many, 20%. So OSD files obviously are no longer part of the AppV package anymore. The replacement for that has been the deployment and user configuration files. There's one actually part of the AppV package, the Apex manifest file, that holds all the static information that was captured in the sequencer, but it's not configurable. So Microsoft wants us to configure this outside of the sequencer. There are two. There's a deployment config and a user config, and it's the default the sequencer creates both of them, but you can copy them and rename them in any way you like. You can apply them when the application package applies to your machine, or when the application gets published. Depends on the actual configuration. If you're using infrastructure environments, so the AppV infrastructure is able to deliver these with the application package to the client, as well as SCCM. I will talk about the infrastructures a little bit later. Both of them, both the Apex manifest file as well as the deployment XML, both hold user and machine configuration. And the hierarchy is that the deployment configuration will always win over the default configuration that is part of your package. The interesting thing we can do now, the user configuration only holds the user configuration stuff and does not hold any machine configuration. So these are applied, the deployment config stuff is applied globally, and the user config stuff is applied per user or per user group. And because it now, we can do actions actually in the machine context. So some of the examples are all the stuff that we are familiar with, like shortcuts, file types, and those kind of things, are part of that manifest file, and you can enable them and disable them. You can edit them and delete them if you want to. But the interesting things are also that you can do scripts. We are familiar with scripts in AppV4. How many of you use scripts to plug around in your package, add stuff, change stuff? Yeah. We can do that. We can do that still with AppV5. But we can now do something in machine context as well, so in system context, so we can actually make changes to the system. And I will then leave you shortly how that works. The user context also holds several configuration types that you can enable, disable, and change, but nothing in the system context. Be sure that even though you have added scripts to the environment, be sure to enable package scripts on your client. Actually, when I was preparing the demo last week, I bounced my head against the wall for a couple of, I'm going to say hours, but that doesn't sound good, right? For a couple of minutes, because I forgot to enable the package scripts. Yeah. And because these config files don't have any like editor or anything, so you're basically poking around in an XML based like Notepad++ or something. You're also thinking like, am I doing something wrong? Am I using the wrong tags here? So it's kind of hard to update. So don't forget that one. Actually, I think this enable package scripts should be part of your base implementation anyway, because you don't want to enable this the moment you start using scripts. You just want to be able to do that. But it's like a security feature on Microsoft. So what are some of the script stuff that we can do? So as I said, in the deployment config, we have both machine configuration as well as user configuration. And you can do it at different stages, just like we've been accustomed to at AppV4.6. You can do it like pre-launch or post-shutdown. Those were the two ones that are used most often. But we can now do a whole lot of extra stuff. So basically, if you look at applying a package to a certain machine, there are different stages the application, or actually the package resides in. So the first stage is the application package gets added onto the client. Nothing is published yet, it's not visible for the user, but the AppV client is aware of that there's an application package. So during add and remove package, we can do stuff. The next stage would be publishing the package, either to that particular user or to the entire machine, depending on how the application is published. So we can do stuff there both in the machine context as well as the user context. Then the user would start the actual application, so you can use the start virtual environment, terminate virtual environment, or the start and exit process stuff. So we have a lot of additional functionality where you can do. But where you've got to be careful is actually where that script would be running, because not everything runs in the same context, and not everything runs every time the application launches. So the ones that run inside the virtual environment, if you want to change something there, the start virtual environment, start process. For some reason, unlike we are familiar with in 4.6, the terminate virtual environments are not running. So the application virtual environment is already terminated when the script runs. So if you want to do something At closure, you cannot do it. All of them can also run outside the virtual environment. And the interesting ones are also on top, because add and remove packets actually allow you to do some scripting in the machine context. And I will show you an example here in the demo later. Same goes kind of for the user config files, but you have less options. So these all run in the user or system environment, but you have less options because adding and removing the package is not part of this configuration file. But there's a lot of overlap. So the next thing that's very different between well, not from a functionality perspective, but from a technical perspective, is application connection groups. How many of you have used dynamic suite composition in your organization? No? Okay, I was going to say nobody. Okay, so a few. So the challenge with dynamic suite composition allows you to basically merge two virtual environments or some virtual environments together so applications could interact. Like Tim said, sometimes we over-isolated, which made it hard if applications had like dependencies or those kind of things. We can use dynamic suiting to merge those two environments. The challenge with dynamic suiting was, however, that it was registered at the package level. So you had to manually change the OSD file of that particular package and tell it to merge with another virtual environment, which probably works fine if you did it like once or twice. But if you have like an entire environment where all those files are out there on machines and distribution environments, you had no idea of which virtual environment was connected to which other virtual environment. So from a management perspective, that would be very hard. So dynamic suiting 2.0, or application connection groups, how Microsoft calls them, basically works differently because the management of the connection group is no longer done at sequencing level, at package level, but you can actually manage it through the infrastructures. It's basically based on a XML file, which holds the packages that you want to concatenate or want to join in one virtual environment, and you can apply this to the client, and the virtual environment will be created. An interesting thing about connection groups is that they have their own identity on the machine, so that they have their own GUID, connection group GUID, and version GUID. And they also have their own configuration settings. So if you have an application, you know where the configuration settings of that particular user are saved separately, like in 4.6 with the PKG file. The connection group holds a separate set of configuration for the applications that are part of that package. And the only challenge that we've seen so far, at least with these connection groups, is if you have deployed a package prior to creating the connection group, the package seems as if it loses its settings when it's moved into the connection group, because the connection group restarts the configuration. So that's a scenario where you have to be aware of. Another thing because if you look at the example here, I have two connection group and I have an application package that is part of two connection groups. What happens if I start that application? In which connection group will it be part of? So basically that is part of the priority that you can set inside the XML file of the connection group. Another thing, if you have like conflicting settings between applications within a connection group, one of them has to win. I know that Tim did a very extensive video on FV4.6 with explaining like what is an hour or something, talking about a very scientific approach. If you merge virtual environments together, which settings will win? And the things I got from there, that it wasn't like the virtual file system was different from the registry, and it was not always very predictable. So the way that is handled now is like you can set the order of the connection group, and the highest in the hierarchy will always win when it comes to setting. It's kind of theoretical, because if these applications like have a relationship, they're not really are going to have a real conflict that in the word that it won't run or anything. But at least you can set the order. So as in 4.6, we have various deployment models. One of them, and actually I was a little bit surprised, is that there's still a full infrastructure. If I would have betted on it, I would say that Microsoft would have built that one. But they didn't, and they didn't at all. They totally rebuilt it from scratch. So we have all kinds of servers there. I'll come to that a little bit later. It's basically, it has the same functionality as the management full infrastructure as we would have in FV4. With one difference is that the reporting is no longer part of that product. And Tim will talk about reporting a little bit later. We also have the SCCM infrastructure. You do require to upgrade to Microsoft SCCM 2012 SP1 before you can actually deploy virtual applications. The nice thing I think about SCCM is that you can manage both 4.6 or 4x and 5.0 applications at the same time. And you obviously also manage your MSI environment or the traditional deployment. So you can create all kinds of dependencies between virtual applications and local installations. That's something the full infrastructure obviously cannot do. But we also have like third-party custom deployment infrastructure. There's still an MSI created by the sequencer. I just learned from Danny that there's actually a bug in SP1 which apparently makes it not deployable. I haven't checked that one out, but that's interesting to see. So if you have a custom environment and you don't have any of these infrastructures, you can also deploy through MSIs. Another one that I do see a lot is PowerShell. So if you have an environment, for example, an RDS environment, and you already have like a deployment infrastructure for that, you can actually leverage PowerShell scripting to add applications and publish applications to those machines if you want. So it's a very broad set of functionality. So let's talk a little bit about the native infrastructure. The native infrastructure, if you look at it, the entire picture holds a management database. Management database is available for application records, application entitlements. It stores the connection groups in there. It does not store the actual application binaries in there, of course, just like with the full infrastructure. We have something called a management server, and we have something called a publishing server. And we used to have like streaming server or lightweight streaming server or whatever the thing was called. And the management server, the difference here now is that the client no longer talks to the management server anymore. The management server is purely for administrating the environment. It no longer talks to any of your clients, which actually makes the environment much more scalable, I'd say. Because now we have a publishing server, and the client can talk to the publishing server. And basically what the publishing server does, it holds in memory a set of record that it receives from the management server on which applications are entitled for which users. So it's basically like a branch office management server or something. You cannot change anything there, but it's very good for scalability. The downside of adding such an additional component is that the interval that the publishing server talks to the management server is by default 10 minutes. So if you change something here, it takes, by default, but it is configurable, it takes 10 minutes for it to dribble down to the client. So it's not that instant as you would see with the current implementation. That does not go, of course, if you have an application set up and you've got the antivirus permissions and access permissions on top and you put a user in a group, that will be instant because that configuration is obviously already done. But if you add applications, it might take time. Another one in the environment is the streaming server. Now the streaming server no longer is like an installable component. So if you run the setup of the infrastructure, it does not have an option to install the actual streaming server. And that's because the streaming server is no more than like a file server for SMB shares, a file server with shares for SMB streaming, or an IIS server with a virtual directory that can stream. So you basically can set that up on any server that you like. And the last one is the reporting server. I don't want to tell too much about it, as Tim is going to drizzle down that one as well. The reporting server is an optional component in the environment, and it isn't even related to the management server or publishing server. You could theoretically implement it in an SCCM scenario. The difference, though, is that it does not hold any actual reports. It's basically a hub for storing information into the database. If you want any reports, you need to build your own reporting solution. And Tim will go down this. As Tim mentioned, we no longer have RTSP. How many of you have infrastructure with RTSP? Oh wow, okay, that's half of you. Okay, so that's no longer possible. Sorry. So it's all HTTP, which is, it's a scalable solution. We have a web-based management console, so no more MMC, no more crashing MMC specifically. It is also based on Silverlight, so that's pretty good. And you can do pretty much everything that you could with the traditional, the current legacy, whatever, for management server. But it's all done in a different way, so you should get accustomed to this interface. The good thing is that the management server, unlike the core environment, is also fully scriptable. You add entitled applications to it. So it's very easy to, if you have like a share in the test environment, to add all those applications to the environment at once. That's very good. So SCCM, like I said, you can also deploy applications through SCCM. It basically hooks into your entire deployment system, so there's nothing additional that you need to set up. You don't have to think about managing servers, streaming servers. It's all handled by SCCM. I think the good thing is that it supports both 4 and 5 clients, so it will allow you to do a very good transition between FV4 and 5 if you're looking into that. One thing you have to keep in mind is that connection groups, actually misspelled here I see, connection groups is how the AppV team calls the virtual environments, but the SCCM team calls it the AppV virtual environments, as you can see here on the screen. But those are actually the same, so you can actually manage the connection group with SCCM now as well, which is a good thing. So let me show you some of that stuff in action before Tim takes over. So I have a, is it, no, it's not readable. Let me put this up. So this is a client with AppV5 on top of it. So let me first show you connection groups. I have a couple of applications that I've sequenced. These are plugins to the browser. So I can add them through the environment through PowerShell, and to prevent me from making any typos, I'm doing it through copy-paste. So what this script, what these actions will actually do, it will add the AppV client packages to the AppV client, and it will publish them all. Everything is PowerShell. How many of you are familiar with PowerShell? Oh, that's good. Okay, so this is easy. Well, I wasn't, and I had to figure it all out with because of AppV5, so thank you for that. Applications are now published. As Tim told you, it's no longer part of any let's say a Q drive or anything. There's still a Q drive on this machine, and that's because I also have an AppV4 client installed on this one. So it's all part of program data, in this case, program data AppV. This is where all the applications are stored. So you don't have to think about caches anymore. Basically, when your disk is full, you're out of luck, you're finished. And in here you would see the applications that were actually published. So let me sort this on date. Probably these ones are failed. So you can actually browse through the environment and through the virtual application package. So this is actually pretty cool, so you don't have to go into the Q drive anymore for virtual applications. So let me start one of those applications up.
Matt, before you do, one thing to notice on the screen, actually you got it covered right now. The files that you see there, you'll see them with an X over them in gray in a lot of cases.
I was going to talk about that.
Oh, you were going to talk about it?
Story, yeah.
Okay,
thank you for that.
I thought you should hit it before the gray goes away.
Well, they don't, because this client is set up.
Oh, you're in cashless?
Yeah. Don't worry. At least I hope. You never know with demos. So I'm starting a virtual application. I can see here that the actual plugins are loaded. If I look at all the plugins, I don't have any more. So this is a Java plugin. And I also have a Flash player plugin. Oops, sorry for that. So if I look at my add-ons over here, I can actually see I have a Flash. So these are two isolated applications. They have no relation with each other, and they don't run in the same virtual environment. But I have here a connection group XML file, which actually will join those two virtual environments together. So I haven't set this up at sequencing time. It's not part of my package. I can actually do this now on the client or in my infrastructure. I'm going to add two. The Java package gets joined with the Flash package, and the Shockwave package will join with the Flash package as well. So if I now run the Java package, I can see that the actual Flash package gets loaded here as well. So this is basically how connection groups works. You can do this on the fly. Now, because I have 3 applications and I've joined them in 2 virtual application groups, Flash would be the application that is in 2 connection groups. So, as I showed you on the screen, the priority actually determines whether or not which application, which connection groups will be launched in. So if I were to look at those XML files, I would see that the Flash package with Java has a priority of 0, which is actually the highest. So this one will be the one that wins. So if I start the Flash package, I would see that it also gets run into the virtual environment of the Java package, as you can see here. Now the tricky thing with those connection group XMLs, and it took me, when App v5 came out, it took me a while to figure out how you should be able to, I mean, if you have a management server, you can create it on the management server. If you have an SCCM environment, you can create it in SCCM. But if you have like only a client, how should you create one? But basically, you can't. There's no way of creating it. You have to basically build that XML file from scratch. Make sure that you have a unique connection group to it, that are PowerShell commands for that, version to it, and put all the XMLs in there. But luckily, we have people like Aaron Parker, who you can ask all the difficult questions to at the end of this session, who actually created a script, which is on his blog, Stealth Puppy blog, where you can actually tell he created a PowerShell commandlet. And this basically enumerates through all the AppV packages that are currently on this system. That's it feeds AppV package components, and you can tell it to create that XML, set a priority, and give it a name. So I can now this command actually does it all. All the packages that are on my system, I create a connection group, enable it on this machine. So this is actually a pretty cool one. You can actually, so that you don't have to figure this out yourself anymore. Connection groups. Let me show you a little bit the infrastructure. So this is the AppV management server. It's based on Silverlight. So like I told you, you have to come a little bit accustomed to it. There are some things are at different places because it's all Silverlight. I think one of the downsides of this method is that it doesn't scale very well on smaller screens. That can be a challenge. And not all the bars are like adjustable. So this one is, but this one isn't. So for example, if this would be my screen, I added this particular access. I cannot, can't see the buttons. Oh, there's even more text there. Oh, there's more text. You see? So that can be a challenge. Basically, it's very simple. Like packages and connection groups, you can add up to here. If you go to the Add AppV client package. I think it's still in my, no, sorry. Let me grab a share where I can copy the package from. Oops. And there you can add it to the environment. You can do multiple, but the good thing about this environment is that you can also script it. So that's actually probably my preferred way of doing stuff, and maybe yours as well. I have the application package. I have to tie it to a specific AD group. I have to tell it to be published. I can edit the default configuration and the deployment configuration and user configuration all from the web interface. And I can do the same thing with connection groups here as well. So I don't have to think about XMLs if I were to add connection groups here. I can basically throw packages in here. I can set the priority. Up a little bit, and I can publish the connection group. So this is all handled by the AppV management server as well, so I can keep track of those here. The last thing I wanted to show you is the scripting part, and I think that is actually a pretty nice value add to this to AppV5. So here I have a package. These files were spit out by the sequencer. This is Notepad++. And I copied the deployment config XML, and because it's full of comment text, you threw out everything that is in there, and then you can start build your script in there. So in this package, I actually pointed out the machine configuration because I wanted to do something in system context, machine scripts, and during add package, I'm going to install a printer driver. So that's, I'm installing stuff on the machine through the FV package when it gets added to the environment. Well, that's pretty cool, but I can also tell it to remove the printer driver, uninstall the printer driver, when it's no longer part of this environment. So, let me first show you that I have no driver installed at this point in time, as you can see here. I'm now going to add this package, and I added the dynamic deployment XML as part of this application package. So you have to define that at application adding. So my application package is now available, as you can see here. But more importantly, I now have actually installed a package into my environment. So that's actually pretty nice stuff that you can do with FV5 now. You can actually install stuff now. I'm not sure if your SCCM admin would like this. So in a lot of organizations, I see that there are people that are managing the desktop when it comes to local installations, and those FV guys that don't really, they cannot change anything on the system. We'll have them let them have their own infrastructure. So they have to be careful now, because you can put all these kinds of MSIs underneath that can easily lose track. So if I were to remove this package, you could see that the application, the printer driver actually gets removed as well. So especially, use this, otherwise you would get all kinds of installations lying all over your machines. Thinking I got a question.
Can you deploy the auxiliary and stuff with the FV package?
Yeah, of course. Okay, that's a good question. So the question is, can you also deploy the FV, the stuff that you want to install inside the FV package? And yes, you can. So you can actually point to, for example, the FV root and put the driver in there as well. Yeah, very good question. Thank you.
Keeping in mind that some of those scripts can only run outside the virtual environment, so you have to watch which ones of those you pick. I have a tendency to just put that installer up in the same folder with the FV package and reference it from there to avoid the problem.
That MSI can't be the FV client, so.
No. That's a good comment. It cannot be the FV client itself. True. I think we've covered it all. It's back to you, Tim.
Well, that's good, because I actually missed that first section the second section I was supposed to do, and switched over too soon. So we got plenty to cover still. Okay, so one of the things that we get in App V5 that we didn't have before is we have true group policies on the client configuration. So anything that you want to set, they give you an ADM template, and you can set all of the client settings from one place now in group policy. And they're true policies, so we don't have to worry about did the client get there first or not, and things like that. This is definitely the way to configure your App V client today. Okay, extensions. So we've had this thing called extensions before, but we never used the term for it. And this is Microsoft's new term. So before App V5, when you bring the application package to the machine, earlier I talked about how we had the bubble and we're not changing the operating system at all. Well, we do a little bit, because there are some things that we need to do to integrate that application with the application to get it to work normally the way the user expects to work it. They expect to see shortcuts in the start menu. They expect to see file association so that they can see a, what apps were you working with? Flash, those aren't good choices. Say a PDF file, and have that look like the Adobe Reader icon, and when they double click on it, launches Adobe Reader. Okay? And App V has always supported the shortcuts and the file associations really well, and also to some extent what we refer to as shell integrations, which means they right click on a particular file type, and it'll say, open, edit, play, whatever that application verb wants to put there, which would then launch the application. And so what App V does in App V4 is the sequencer gathers that stuff, sets it aside, and during the publishing phase, integrates that natively on the operating system for the user so that they get all of these integrations. So now this virtualized application works to the user, and also other applications, which typically go through the file type association as a way to launch the other app, also work with this virtualized package. Well, in App V5, we get a lot more of those things. They've extended that list, and I'll show that in a second. But to focus in a little bit on the shell integrations, if you look at HKey local machine classes or HKey current user classes or the overlay one, which is the HKey classes root key in the registry, when you look at a particular file association, you'll see things that look like this. And the things that are here are what I refer to as shell integrations. And those are things that ultimately point to executables. So the Windows Explorer process is the one that actually creates that desktop shell that you see. That's the process that's running. It's running outside of any virtualized environment. So we need to put these things into the real registry so that the Explorer can see these things. So the Explorer can see these shell integrations that point to an EXE. The EXE can be inside our package. You know, it can be the, I want to run Adobe Reader with this file associated with it. So this stuff works as long as AppV puts the stuff in there. Now when they right-click, they'll see the appropriate shell extensions, and that'll work. Shell integrations. Shell extensions are different. Those show up under the shell X key, and that's kind of how you tell which is which. Shell extensions are DLLs that need to be loaded. These are COM DLLs, and most of them are in process COM DLLs, which means the Internet Explorer just kind of loads it as a DLL locally in its memory and runs it. There's also out of process, which goes in a new process. The in-process ones, the key is that if that in-process DLL is just doing something really simple, it's not a problem. Typically, you know, it might be what it loads in is an additional right-click. But rather than put it to an EXE, they decided to just bury it in the DLL and have it loaded in. Those shell extensions I found working by hand outside of what AppV is doing is I can actually deploy those. I can pull them out, notice them, pull them out, script using some of the scripts that Ment was just showing as an add package, and actually publish them out and get that functionality back. For example, Adobe Reader has one that adds a property sheet, a tab. If you right-click on a PDF file, when you have Adobe Reader natively installed, you get an extra tab on there that provides information that they pull from inside the file, from basically the metadata of the PDF file. Talks about the author and things like that. With AppV4, we do not get that. In AppV5, we don't get that natively. AppV strips that stuff out because they're not sure it's going to work, so they just strip that stuff out. But I can find that stuff, pull it out, put it in a script, and get that functionality added back in. But if that DLL needs something that's inside the virtual environment, and I've run into these guys, you know, they want to actually look at the virtual registry as part of what they're doing. There is no virtual registry. We can't get those to work today. And that's primarily why they strip those out. That's why we get some of the things and not. For the most part, the things that we're getting are what we need. You know, we knew that there were a few here and there, like WinZip, you know, we'd lose some right clicks. But it's usually functionality that the user can do another way. This is just an additional way for them to do the same job. So we've lived with those. Some companies have decided in cases they couldn't deploy the application because they didn't have those integrations. If they're that important to you, it might be possible to work around it now. You could do it with AppV4, but AppV5 is a better infrastructure because of the way the scripting works now. Okay, so we also get a bunch of other extensions. In AppV4.6, when they did Office 2010, they provided us a toolkit. And it solved a bunch of problems for virtualizing Office. Didn't solve all the problems, but it solved a bunch of them. One of the ones that they solved in there was what was called a protocol handler. So if an application outside that environment wants to email something using the Outlook client, it needs to use the mail-to protocol. And one of the primary ways that a developer would do that just never worked with AppV until they provided a protocol handler specifically for Outlook in there. When they did that, we said, hey, you need to create a generic version of that, and they did in AppV5. So anything that's dealing with a protocol, and typically mail-to is a primary one, some of the HTTP stuff, although not used very often, I don't think. Are there any? Live Meeting uses it? Okay. So some of those things are now natively supported. You sequence the application, it notices, it pulls it in, it takes care of everything at publishing time, and now the interactions between your virtualized package and the others work out of the box pretty well. Other extensions we have some more control over the COM integrations. I haven't quite figured out how to use this yet. In the past, we had the local interaction allowed tag that we could put in the OSD file to solve some interactions between our virtualized applications and other things, trying to talk to that package through COM. We still have that capability in App v5, but they fine-tuned it. We can turn that on for either in or out of process COM objects. I can't quite figure out where I need that yet, but I know I'm going to run into a package pretty soon that's going to need me to turn one of those on, and turning the other one on breaks it, so I need that functionality. Software client systems, application capabilities. This is part of modernizing the platform. Microsoft has added a lot of APIs for developers over the years. And quite frankly, until we got this capability in App v5, I didn't even know about them. Okay, and I'm learning on it, and these are actually kind of cool. So software client systems, the OS defines about 5 systems that are plug-in replaceable, as in, what's my email client? How do I display rich multimedia files? I don't remember the others, but there's 5 of them that are in there. And an application in installing can register itself and say that, hey, I'm the guy. And that's a new type of publishing thing we now have in there. The one I like most is application capabilities. So application capabilities is how we now solve the file type association conflict problem. You publish out an application, it wants to own .zip. You publish out another one, it wants to own .zip. In 4.6, only one owns .zip. And it overwrites everything on the other one. You don't even get a right-click open with, necessarily. The application capabilities is a way that the developer registers at install time, hey, I can do stuff with this particular file extension. And then it's up to the user to decide how they want to use it. And that comes in through a control panel applet and the default programs. They can select, oh, I want this one to own it. And the other ones show up as a right-click. If the developer did that in their package, AppV now naturally supports it. What I really love, now that I know about it, is if the developer didn't do that to the package, it's just some registry settings I need to make up. I add that into my package at sequencing time, and now I get those capabilities. It's really great. It solves that application conflict problem. App paths is a solution they put in place for the conflict with application paths. So when an application gets added in, if they modify the path variable, App v4 virtualizes that, and that works pretty well, but they came up with a better way for developers that they can register, here's the app path I need, the things for my package, but it only takes effect to the running application itself. So if they do that, basically it's a registry string, and it gets prepended to whatever the path is, only for the executable it's running. So it keeps that change from conflicting with other applications. And so if the app does that now, App v5 picks that up for us automatically. This is a great way to solve the Java conflict problem, by the way. If you have more than one Java on the box, app paths would take care of that for you. Okay, so that was that. And now I got to flip through these slides because I've...
Oh, this was the first one.
Yeah, that was at the end of the... I forgot that I was supposed to do that section.
How are we time-wise?
About 20 minutes.
Yeah, about 20 minutes. Yeah, we're way behind. Report server, hey, there's a new report server. The great thing about the report server is that it doesn't matter how you deploy the AppV packages. So the reports we used to have before was only tied to the AppV management server. Now, if you're using SCCM, if you're using the client in a standalone mode, it doesn't matter. You can point the client to the report server, and it'll get the reports for you. The bad news is there are no reports. It's just a database. Okay? What you need to understand about the database is when the clients report, and those are scheduled once a day by default, and they have a time period that you can configure as to when they can run. So they kind of randomize themselves so you don't overload the report server. But typically, 1 a.m. Plus or minus a half hour kind of thing, and they'll all get their data in. When that data goes in, it goes into what these set of tables down here, which are pretty much kind of temporary holding places. Once a day, the SQL server wakes up with a job that's scheduled in there, and it actually pulls that data and processes it and puts it into the main tables. And then you report off of the main tables. Again, there are no reports out of the box. You've got to do them yourself. But this is the entire database. It's very simple. It's not hard to figure out. I spent an afternoon, and I'd never even used the SQL reporting services, and I created 3 reports, one that would show application usage by user, another one by package, also what clients were reporting in, so I could check to find out if I'm missing any. So pretty easy to use. Okay, so transparency. So this is a new section I'm supposed to get to. What they tried to do in App v5 is take away a lot of the dark holes that we had throughout the system. So we had this SFT file, and there weren't any tools that could really read it very much. We had the PKG file, and it wasn't until just a few years ago that Kali Sumanaki and I both provided some tools that got us some visibility as to what's in that file, what's getting captured in that application-related data. App v5, all this stuff is transparent. You can open up that App v file, just rename it to a zip. You can open it up and you can see what's in there. The user data that gets stored afterwards gets stored not in a single PKG file the way it needs to, but actually in a redirected, looking exactly like the kind of file that was written by the application itself. It's just redirected to a new area. Where they store these things is in some strange places as far as I'm concerned, and this is one of the things we need to be aware of. Depending on what the application was trying to do, some of these things, in the past, all of the user data associated with the application we captured went into this PKG file that went into the user's profile. App data by default, or you would move that over to their home drive, typically in a roaming environment. So it followed them from machine to machine. Now, only if the application was trying to write things that should probably roam, if it was a naturally app, does it roam. So the items in bold here are the three categories that a standard user, that stuff naturally gets written into areas that roam. But if the application tries to write into the common app data area or into the app data local area, that stuff no longer naturally roams. You need to be aware of that. This fixed problems for us in roaming environments in the past because AppV just kind of grabbed all that stuff and brought it along, so we didn't have to worry about it. Now we have to think about this in App v5. If this is a problem for you, I did release a free tool called App Remediation is the name of the tool, right? Do I? Okay. It'll show up here eventually. An App Remediation is something you can throw in one of those OSD scripts that you basically say, ooh, I need to remediate this app, and you apply the, you just give it the package GUIDs. And it actually, basically, when the package shuts down, it copies this stuff into the roaming area. And then when you start back up, you have the second script that pulls it back into the roaming area so the AppV client will see it again, the way that thing works. So we can actually overcome those problems. You also need to be aware if someone's an admin, only 2 of those items are bolded, not 3. So as long as your users aren't admins, not a problem.
So I think in addition, a big important change is that at v4, you don't need roaming profiles to actually roam settings for virtual applications. And that's no longer, if you don't have like any roaming profile solution, whatever it is, this stuff cannot, this is just exposed to the system. So you need something additional.
Yeah, and I know a lot of customers today have AppSense in their environment as well, and that's a good pairing with AppV to help solve some of those problems as well. Okay. Hitting the wrong button, that's why. This is kind of a summary of what roams and what doesn't naturally now in AppV. Oh, this is the App. You're right, I did have a slide. So this is how I would add in this into the machine config file, deployment config file, to add in this scripting. So I just throw in something in both the start and terminate user environment to copy that stuff over. Okay, I'll find it. This is you again. Okay. Do you have demos on this?
I do, but let me see time-wise how that works out. So Tim talked about this a little bit, shared content store. App v4 had something that we called the read-only, shared-only, cache-only, what was that name?
Read-only cache.
Read-only shared cache thing, which was kind of a technical implementation. It was very hard to manage. You had to create this writable copy of the cache file, put your applications in there, copy it out to a central location, point all your VDI machines to work that location. If you want to update it, you have to pull it out again, create a writable copy, copy it back when it was in use, so you have to do symbolic linking, so it was a very hard solution. The shared content store changes that a lot, because basically what it does, on a client machine, it tells the client to be in shared content store mode. It's like it's a PowerShell command or group policy, whatever you want. And at that point, it basically doesn't stream any of the information down to the client anymore. So first of all, you can have like a hybrid environment. So for example, your desktop and your laptop's clients that are connected to like your management infrastructure. infrastructure. They do stream down the bits, and you can have your VDI or SBC clients don't stream down the bits in the same environment. You don't need any additional management. So that's a good thing. So the way this works is with sparse files. So basically, at that publishing time, like Tim told you in the streaming slides, at publishing time it will stream down only the required information for the application to actually register on the system, and all the calls after that are basically always redirected to the central system. If you manage your environment, you add new applications, you update applications, the client acts just exactly the same as it would if it would stream down the information. Now, obviously this saves disk space in RDS environment, but the question is this also moves like the challenge towards the streaming server, because that's now a very important component. Because if there's no streaming server, there are no applications to start. It doesn't cache anything, right? And it also requires the throughput and the network utilization of the client in shared content store mode would go up, because every subsequent streaming request would be redirected back to the server. So it's a very good solution, and I like it very much because I was at a customer implemented 50 applications, which would normally hold 12.1 gigabytes of data on the client cache, and it now only holds 580 megabytes on this cache. So I actually can ask Explorer, if I go to that program data AppV folder, I right-click, select properties, I actually see the difference. So you can easily 90 or 95% out. How much space you can save really depends on the application. It's hard to calculate, but it reduces it dramatically. So all the information is requested back to the server. If you currently have an App v4 environment, you probably have all your applications virtualized, or at least big extent of your applications virtualized. Those applications cannot be directly added to the App v5 client. Those file systems are not compatible at all. So the applications that you have on App v4 have to be converted to the new file system. That's something you can do. Microsoft released something called a package converter, which is a PowerShell command on the sequencer. It doesn't actually sequence, so it's part of the sequencer PowerShell, but it doesn't actually sequence the application. It basically transforms the format of the application into the new file format of that v5. Does this cover all scenarios? Will all your applications will be 100% successfully migrated? Probably not. There are some gotchas there. I will not go into that too detailed. I have a session tomorrow on lessons learned on AppV, so if you're interested in that, I can show you some of the things that we ran into that you have to look out for in your current application estate for this factory over. But there are ways to migrate your applications over. And the good thing is once you've then migrated to the AppV5, you have like the PowerShell to add them to your infrastructure. Tim showed you some of the local application integration with the shell extensions that are now supported, but there are other cool ways to integrate it to your virtual environment as well. In FV4, we used to have a switch to the SFT tray command called /exe, and you can run alternative executables into the virtual environment. Now, this was frequently used for troubleshooting, running command prompt, or registry editors, or I don't know, all those kinds of tools inside the virtual environment. Basically what the App v5 client now does, you can run any executable on the name. There's no SFT tray launcher anymore, right? So all the applications are just there on the system. If you browse down to program data, App v, up to the executable, you can basically double-click the executable and it will launch the virtual environment. That's how App v now integrates. So there's no launcher process. But what you can do, if you want to run inside the virtual environment and look for that application, you can actually provide a switch to any executable on the machine with the /advve, provide the package GUID and the version GUID, and that application will run inside the virtual environment. Now, if you look, for example, my demo with the Internet Explorer plugins, in FV4, if I had to do that, I actually provide Internet Explorer as part of the sequencing process. I had to create a shortcut as part of the package for that particular Java package or Flash package. That's no longer necessary. I can actually create a generic Java package. And if I had like a solution where I can put shortcuts or file types or whatever on my machine, like a user environment solution, I can actually create shortcuts on the fly without having to create new packages. So that's actually pretty neat. This can also obviously be used for troubleshooting. Now another method which goes even further, and I remember that Aaron blogged about this, calling this the what was it, integration of Nirvana or something, at least it's a very nice solution. V actually holds a registry key at local machine called run virtual. And underneath that run virtual key, you can create a new key with the process name, for example, iExplore.exe. And you have to change the default value of the registry key to the package view with version GUID. And every time that application executable is launched, it will run inside this virtual environment. So you can provide a package with plugins, register Internet Explorer, and no matter how Internet Explorer is started, it will always run inside this virtual environment. So that's a very nice feature, I think.
Except that there's no management support for it.
No.
You're responsible for getting
that
out there.
You do it.
Yeah.
True. Packages must be published global. It's also something you would bang your head on. You can get it to work. Talking out of experience here. But you can do it. I can demo it later on.
No, we don't have time.
We don't have time now. So this is you again then, Tim?
Yeah.
I will demo this
Okay.
if you're in my session. I will demo this in my session as well on Friday tomorrow.
Okay, so some of the areas that we still have incompatibilities between AppV and traditionally installed. And this is my kind of basic list from AppV 4.6. And the ones that are highlighted here are a little bit different. So I highlighted device drivers because, as Med showed earlier, we can now deploy that separately using AppV, although if we have a good infrastructure with a config manager out there, you probably want to do it separately than that. Oh, boy, that sounded really good. Sorry. The .NET frameworks, again, that's not a good idea to try to put those inside the AppV package. Those really should be deployed externally and handled separately there. VC runtimes and the MS XMLs, these have become a problem for us a little bit. And I think I have a slide here. So I have a web page. If you go to www.tmerchant.com, go to the tools page. I've got a whole bunch of free tools that I give out. I also have links to this page and the one that follows, which is basically your help guide for sequencing applications with VC runtime. So basically, you're going to sequence the application. You're going to notice by looking in the File tab that these VC runtimes got added as part of the install by taking a look at the Windows side-by-side folder and finding these items are in there. You come to this page, you look at what the version string was, you come to this page, and it'll give you a link to the download from Microsoft. So now you revert your sequencer, you install it natively, you sequence the package, and as long as that VC runtime is also installed natively to the client, then you're good to go. Okay? We have the same problem with some of the MS XMLs, and I document that on a separate page that's there. Okay. Services that have protection are another problem we've been running into. If you have anything that has, for example, the Flex, the FlexNet stuff as a licensing mechanism. I also ran into this recently in Google Chrome Enterprise has some services. These are services that are trying to protect themselves from viruses, and they set special permissions, and it's really incompatible with the sequencer today. So the basic solution, you can kind of Google for these guys and you'll see solutions out there, is basically we have to fix the permissions during sequencing to get these things to work. I talked about application capability, so we'll just skip over that. I do have a couple of other tools that I'll just very briefly show so we can have some Q&A here. Get out of here, go to this VM. Okay, so one tool that I find very helpful in my environment when I'm finished sequencing is this AppV Manage tool. So this is my basic troubleshooting tool for my first client. After I sequence, I come here. You basically register a, whoops, sorry, hit the wrong button. You register a UNC of where to find your packages. It finds them all. If I want to add a package, I just click on it, add the package. If I got a deployment config file, I add with config. In this case, it found 2 in the folder, so it tells me which one do you want. Pick that in, and then I can publish globally or not. Doesn't that figure for a demo? That one didn't work. I can also see my client config, so as mentioned, I often forget to set the enable package scripts here, so if I want to fix that, I can do this. This just uses all the PowerShell interface of the client behind the scenes. When I want to debug, I can pick my package and start up a Windows Explorer, a registry, regedit. I can go into the Windows Services Manager inside the virtual environment and do these things. If I have Procmon on the box, it'll take care of that for you and load that up for you automatically. If I want to look at what files got changed and saved by the user, I can click onto this thing, and I got a color-coded chart that'll show you those things. So this is a nice tool for quick, easy. You don't have to deal with the PowerShell. It's just a GUI to allow you to work with it. A new one that I came out with this last week or two ago is what I call the App V self-service, and it's really got two modes to it. This is, in essence, this is beta. This is early on. A self-service portal. So if you just want to have all the packages up on a share, you don't want to deal with SCCM, you don't want to deal with the management server, you can just have the packages on the share, it registers, it looks for there, pulls the stuff out, tells you what you have, what you don't have, if there's any upgrades to the packages available, and you can just say, yeah, I want that thing. There's another mode that I would use in a VDI scenario for a pooled desktop that'll automatically pull the stuff in. The only trick it uses is that you have to have AD groups that match the package names, and that's how it matches it up. So you can do authorization in AD, you just have your stuff sitting up on a share, and the tool pulls the stuff in. Okay, there's that, and then there's one more to just quickly do here, which is if you're doing XenApp, I had another tool to help you out that we expanded this last year. Whoops, sorry, this is a tool here. It's called Publish from App V. So this solves the problem of getting things published into the XenApp console for XenApp 6.5. So basically what it does is it pulls the information out of the App V client and say, oh, here are the packages that you have. Here's what you have from App V4. Here's what you have from App V5 on this machine. If I want to publish, I just pick the packages. This one's grayed out because it's already been published in a previous run of this. I pick my servers. Okay, I pick my 80 groups I'm publishing to. And I can just pull from an OU if I want. Groups, and let me just grab that for now. Hit next. Then I can set all of the other detailed stuff that you could do through XenApp console and all this stuff. And the nice thing I did in this tool is that it remembers your settings on this page. So when you go back to this application next time, it remembers what you set last time, because most of these things are always the same. And then you just run it. Did I hit that button? Okay. Probably has to wake up a bunch of stuff. But basically you do that, and then it's published. You know, you're done. So it takes care of a lot of those little nagging things, like getting the icon right in the console and stuff like that. Okay, so those are free tools. Again, those are all up on my website when you want those. And then I guess we're out of time. We can take